and I'm grateful that I'm speaking along with Mr. Dr. Tyagarajan, who is a very knowledgeable person, as I can see, hearing him, the way he presented his thing. So what I'll be doing is I'll be looking at the macroeconomic analysis of the budget, because that, is the first thing. The theoretical framework of this, presentation is based on my article in EPW on September 26, 2020, and the recently released book on Indian economy's greatest crisis. Both of them formulate the theoretical framework because the lockdown changed the macroeconomics of the country, and therefore we needed a different kind of a theoretical framework to do the analysis. What I have argued for the last some time is that the Indian economy has faced a collapse which is unprecedented. This kind of a collapse has never happened before, and therefore there are social and political implications which will be long lasting. It's not as if they'll be over within a short period of time. And what I've also argued is that we are headed towards a new normal. It's not as if we are going to recover back to 2019. There are a lot of changes that have taken place which are going to be there in the coming days and years. And therefore, we need to plan for these changes. So a budget should address these changes as well. Now, as an introduction, every budget contains a lot of things. But the crucial aspect of a budget is its macro aspect. If the macro aspect is not structured properly, then the micro and the specific sectoral policies also do not work out. So it is in this context, as Mr. Tyagarajan said, the finance minister has been saying that this budget would be a once in a century budget. Now, of course, it's a once in a century budget because we've never faced a crisis like this before. Therefore, it was going to be a once in a century budget. But the question is it going to solve the problems that the economy had faced? And that's where I'm going to argue that the budget is far short of what was needed to make it a once in a century budget. So, as a fact, it's a once in a century budget, but the problem is that it's not solving the problems that the economy is facing. So, what is the principal problem? The economy needed to be restored to its pre pandemic levels, but that is not likely to happen because of this budget. So the part A of the speech, usually spells out what is the various policies that are going to be there. So for the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, the poor, the farmers, the elderly, the northeast, the gender question. So the part of the speech is something that makes the budget look good. But then the question is that what is it that's going to be implemented. So the government means business only if what it's suggesting is implemented. But if it's not implemented, then it doesn't mean business. It's just a show. But the budget also claims that it is in the supply side framework spelled out in the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme. The Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme is basically a supply side response to the economic crisis that was facing the Indian economy. Now, what were the expectations from the budget? The expectations were that the economy would be boosted. My own understanding is that even in January 2021, the economy is at least 10% below what it was in January 2020. And the reason why I'm saying that is that, major components of the organized sector in the economy from the services sector have not yet revived. So whether it be transportation, trade, tourism, contact services of various kinds, they have not yet revived. For instance, the railways, which used to run 14,000 passenger trains earlier, is barely running around 1,000 trains. This kind of thing is there with the hotels, restaurants, tourism, etc., etc. So the economy is still down by about 10%, which means that for the year as a whole, the government has been saying the economy is down only 7.7%, but my argument is down by far, far more than that. And at the end of the year, in an optimistic guess, it'll be down by about 29%. So, which is an unprecedented situation. Our economy was hurt the most because we have such a large unorganized sector. And recent study from Azim Premji University shows that 20% of those people who had lost employment in April, May 2020 have not yet got their work back. Similarly, the All India Manufacturers Organization suggests that large number of businesses are closing down, the small businesses and so on. And Confederation of All India Traders Association has also been suggesting that a lot of retail traders are in the process of shutting down. So all this suggests that the economy is considerably down and it needed to be boosted. So that's the first. Second is that the crisis was brought about by the health sector, and therefore the health, it was expected, would be boosted quite considerably, so that we can deal with the health crisis that is facing us. Is not just a question of vaccination, for which 35,000 crores has been allotted, but also we need to step up our primary health centers, secondary health centers, tertiary centers, all over the country, especially in the rural areas and the smaller cities. The larger metros have a better system, but the smaller centers do not. But directly, the health expenditure has been cut from a revised estimate of 82,445 crores to 74,602 crores. And that's not very promising, because we needed a lot more expenditure on the health sector. Then agriculture has been in crisis, because in Q1 of the year that's running, when the April, May, that time the farmers lost a lot. The agriculture crop was good, but because transportation had stalled, trading had stalled, therefore fruits, vegetables, milk, etc., suffered. You had pictures of fruits rotting in the fields, vegetables rotting in the fields. You had a picture of Shimla mirch being thrown on the roads. The demand for milk came down very substantially, because the major consumers of milk, like hotels, restaurants, sweet shops, etc., they were closed. So the milk suffered. Similarly, eggs, 1 crore eggs are distributed to the midday meal scheme in the country, and because the schools stopped, therefore the demand for eggs fell. Chicken were culled, because people were worried that that might spread the virus. So therefore, a lot of chicken was culled. So in other words, we had flowers not coming out to the market, so they were also stalled. And this is 50% of the agricultural production. So if 50% of the agricultural production was down, then it means in Q1, instead of agriculture sector growing by 3.4%, it actually declined. And therefore, the incomes of the farmers suffered. And that's why farmers are protesting, apart from the fact that they are protesting against the three bills. So agriculture also has suffered loss of income during the last year. So it was expected that agriculture would get larger allocation, but that's also not in evidence. Similarly, the rural development schemes also, the step up has not taken place. It was expected that defense would also have a lot more allocation given the problems we are having at the borders, but that also is not in evidence. So, in other words, the expectations from the budget are not being fulfilled in terms of the critical things about growth, about health, about agriculture, rural development, defense, and so on. Now, this table shows what the expenditures are, compared to budget estimates and revised estimates. You can see that the defense is hardly rising from 3,43,822 crores to 3,47,000 crores. Agriculture and allied activities has gone up from 1,45,000 crores revised estimate to 1,48,000 crores, which is less than the budget estimate of last year, or rather the current year. The education sector has also been scaled down compared to the budget estimates. Of course, on the revised estimates, it's increased, but compared to the budget estimates, it's come down. Whereas education needed a lot more support, because large number of children of the poor people, the middle class, have been withdrawn from the private schools, and they are now being told that they will go to the public schools. Also, a lot of poor people's children, they're not able to get education through the net, because either they don't have the devices that are needed, like mobile phones and computers and laptops, or the Wi-Fi is not there or not stable. So it was expected that for education also there'd be increased allocation, so that Wi-Fi could be made a public good, so that everybody would have access to it. Also, libraries of devices should have been set up, so that the children of the poor could go to these libraries where they could access on computers the classes, etc. So education needed to be stepped up very substantially. That was not there. Health, I've already told, come down. Rural development, revised estimate was 2,16,000 crores. Now it's come down to 1,94,000 crores. So in other words, critical areas have not been funded. the way they should have been funded given the crisis that was facing. So the main reason why all this is happening is that the macro is missing from the picture. Now, usually when the part A of the budget speech begins, it gives the macro picture of the economy first by giving us what is the state of the economy, growth of the economy, inflation, balance of payment. All these macro variables are first given. And then the budget speech comes, but this has not been done because obviously the macro picture is rather poor at this point of time in this particular year. Similarly, at the end of the budget speech, usually it is given what are the additional revenues from the various tax proposals. That has also not been done. The speech ended rather abruptly. This, you know, information about the various tax proposals that has not been given at the end. So the macro is in that sense missing from the budget speech itself, and the macro is weak as far as the implementation plan is concerned. So why is the current year facing a problem? Because the lockdown means that supplies freeze and demand goes down. So lockdown is a voluntary cessation of economic activity. There are factories, there are offices, but people are not able to go there, and especially the unorganized sector is not able to get out at all. So therefore, what happens is the incomes drop. And the CMIE data suggested that 122 million people lost employment in April itself. That has recovered to a certain extent, but my argument has been that while 122 million may have lost employment, 200 million lost work. Because if my factory was shut, I was employed, but I was not working. If I was a government servant, I was getting paid, but I was not going to office. If I was a teacher, I was still in employment in the school, but I was not going to the school to teach. So therefore, the work that came down was much sharper than the employment that was lost. So it's the massive loss of employment that led to a shortage of demand. Plus, those who are employed, even they face salary cut. Like in the case of media, I heard that between 10% to 40% salary cut was there. Similarly, businesses have been facing closure, and therefore they also have cut back on their demand. Farmers, as I mentioned, they lost incomes, and that's why demand from them also came down. And the unorganized sector is in distress because those are the people who could not get out, and therefore the 94% of employment is in the unorganized sector. If their incomes suffer, then the overall demand comes down in the economy. So, in other words, large number of people from different segments of society have suffered loss of employment, loss of work, and loss of income, and that's why demand is short. So, what did we need to do? We needed to step up expenditure sharply. If my estimate is correct that the economy will be down 29%, what it means is that from roughly 204 lakh crores last year, will come down by roughly of the order of about 60 lakh crores. So the expenditures by the government needed to go up very sharply. But what is expenditure budgeted at? Rupees 34.8 lakh crore. And the current year's estimated expenditure is 34.5 lakh crore. In other words, in the coming year, there's hardly any step up in the budgeted expenditure. So therefore, the boost that is required in the coming year is unlikely to come. And the private sector is in no position to compensate for this shortfall in demand, because they are not going to invest unless demand picks up. And capacity utilization, we know already before the pandemic hit us, the economy was in crisis. For 8 quarters, the rate of growth had been falling from 8% to roughly about 3.5%. And that was because, you see, the investment had declined from a peak in the 2012-13 at 36.5%. It had declined to already about 28 and 30%, and it's declined further during the pandemic. So the private sector demand is not going to rise unless capacity utilization rises, unless the capacity utilization only if the capacity utilization was 70% earlier, it's come down during April, May for large components to zero. And even after that, the pickup has been slow in major sectors. So investment is not going to be very buoyant from the private sector. So that the public sector had to do the heavy lifting to generate demand and to give support to the poor people. And that's not in evidence. Now, the government says that the fiscal deficit is estimated at 9.5%. But my argument is that let's forget the FCI for the moment. 9.5% is the deficit in the center's budget. And then we have the states who will have about 5% deficit, and then the public sector. So all told, the fiscal deficit would be running at around 20%, And if it is calculated, they must be calculated not on the 204 lakh crore or the estimate that the government has given of the GDP, but at the much lower fiscal deficit, as Mr. Tyagarajan was pointing out. Now, this 9.5% also is expected to fall to 6.8% next year. But again, because the revenues are likely to be short, given that the economy is still not recovered back to where it was in 2019, so the fiscal deficit is likely to be higher. But the point is that the fiscal deficit is expected to fall as far as the budgetary allocations are concerned. Now, if as the Mr. Tyagarajan pointed out, if the transfers from the budget to the FCI, they are taken out, then 9.5% will come down by roughly another 1.5%. So 9.5% will effectively, which we can create demand, will only be around 8% or something thereabouts. So it's not as if the fiscal deficit has been raised to the extent it should have been raised, and the problem would be that even from 8%, the expected fiscal deficit is 6.8%. So you have a situation in which the expenditure is roughly the same and the deficit is likely to be smaller. So if the deficit is likely to be smaller, then how is the demand going to be raised? If the expenditure is the same, then again the demand will be short. So how would the economy revive, given that we are keeping the overall expenditure level roughly the same and we are expecting a smaller deficit in the center's budget? So two problems arise in this context. First, the deficit would be higher because revenues will be short, and that is something that would need to be taken care of. And as Mr. Tyagarajan pointed out, usually the central government, tries to fudge around with figures. It tries to present a rosier picture that is there. And the problem will be compounded by the fact that the shrinkage of the economy in 2021 is not 7.7%, but it's much larger, as I was saying. And the unorganized sector, that is the one that's got hit. So when the fiscal deficit starts shooting up, what does the government do? It cuts back on capital expenditure in social sectors. So capital items which are not committed, but there are many other items that are committed items like interest payments, salaries, defense, and so on. But capital items are not committed. So when you want to control your fiscal deficit, what does the government do? It cuts back on capital items. And that's what I expect, that as the fiscal deficit rises in the coming year, capital items will be cut back. Similarly, the social sector expenditures are also cut back. So social sector expenditures are usually like health and education and drinking water and employment generation and things like that. So those items are also cut back, usually when the deficit starts rising. And that's what I expect, that the deficit will tend to be higher. And the government is very sensitive to, what the deficit should be. It keeps saying we'll bring the fiscal deficit down. That's why in the current year also, it did not allow the fiscal deficit to go up the way it should have been allowed to go up. And the second problem is that key items that could boost demand quickly have been curtailed for 2021-22. This is what Mr. Tyagarajan was also pointing out, that Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which had risen from 60 lakh crores to about 1.1 lakh crore, has been cut back to about 70,000 crores. National Social Assistance Program has been cut back. PM Awas Program, PM Kisan, and the food subsidies, they have all been cut back. And these are the ones that would have boosted demand quickly. So these, if you cut back these items, then the boost to the economy will be much less. So what is the government doing? It's trying to boost business sentiment. How is it trying to boost business sentiment? It's signaling to the business community that, look, we are not increasing your taxes or cess. And therefore, what was expected by businesses earlier, because the fiscal deficit is expected to be high, what was expected was that there may be a wealth tax or there may be a COVID cess or something like that. So the business community has reacted positively, and that's why the stock market shot up. It is also signaled to the business community that we'll do a much bigger disinvestment program and we'll monetize the public assets. So sale of public sector assets like disinvestment of LIC, these are the ones that are being pointed to, as Mr. Tyagarajan has already pointed to. So the idea is, as he pointed out, these are all supply side actions then the government expects that because of these, the business sentiment might improve and investment may take place. But the question is, will that happen? That is the big if. Now, as far as the public sector is concerned, the government started by saying there'll be minimum government and maximum governance. Now, that sounds very nice, but I think what is the problem that we have faced? The problem that we faced is that whatever laws are there, they're not implemented. And that's why governance is a problem in the country. So it's not that we have a huge number of laws, but our laws are not implemented. And for that, for minimum government and maximum governance, what we needed to do was to build an accountability of the government. And that is not really in evidence in this budget. The public sector is being dismantled. But what has the pandemic shown? The pandemic has shown that we are dependent on our public sector for support during a crisis. So whether it be the health, whether it be the transportation of the migrant workers, etc., it's the public sector that came forward to help the government. Now, in any situation of a crisis, we need a better public sector. We need a more efficient public sector. And this cronyism that has plagued our public sector, that is what needed to be checked. Now, the cronyism can be checked by the government itself. For that, it doesn't have to go anywhere else and doesn't have to sell the public sector. We know that new viruses are coming with great rapidity, as I've discussed in my book. This is the seventh virus in the last 20 years. We've had N1, H1, SARS, MERS, Nipah, Zika, Ebola, and now this one. So every 2 or 3 years a new virus is coming, and we are lucky that this virus is virulent, but mortality is not as high as in Ebola. In Ebola, 40 to 50% of the people who contracted the disease died, but it was not so virulent. Now, the next virus could be as virulent as coronavirus and could have mortality as high as Ebola. Then, within a few months, a few 100 million people could die. So, we need to be prepared to face crisis that is likely to come every few years, and especially now that the environmental damage, has gone up. Extreme weather events are taking place. We saw 3 days back what happened in the Himalayas. So all kinds of crises will keep coming, and therefore we need a stronger public sector and efficient public sector rather than dismantling of the public sector that is being attempted. Now, in a capitalist economy, market failure is rampant, whether it be vis-a-vis public good, whether we merit wants or increasing returns to scale, and a variety of other factors because of which markets fail. And that is when government intervention is required for optimality. But what has happened is that in India, our public intervention has been through cronyism. So we need to end this cronyism and bring about accountability of government. That accountability is very crucial, without which we are not going to be able to tackle any of the problems. And I am reminded of Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York State. He came every day during the pandemic when it was roaring in the New York City and in New York State, and he would make clear what was going on. And he said transparency is very essential, accountability is very essential, otherwise the public will not believe in us, and if the public doesn't believe in us, then we cannot carry forward our programs. They will not listen. We will announce lockdown, but if they keep coming out, then lockdown would be a failure. So we need to end cronyism, bring about accountability, and that is not really in evidence. So instead of less rules, the question is of implementation of rules, and that will happen only if cronyism is ended, okay, and if the politics is cleaned up. Without that, we are going to be sunk, whether we have a good public sector or not. Now, let's come to investment and disinvestment, another point that Mr. Tyagarajan had touched on. The public, investment has been increased from 4.39 lakh crores, revised estimate to 5.54 lakh crores. But my argument has been that disinvestment must be subtracted from the investment, because disinvestment means that I'm selling off some of my capital and using that money to create new capital. So therefore, in a sense, what we have to do is net out the disinvestment from the investment program of the government. This is a point I've been making for the last 30 years, ever since the new economic policies came and disinvestment started. So if we look at that, then this year we've hardly been able to disinvest worth 30 lakh crores, and next year we are planning to disinvest 1.75 lakh crores. So if you net that out, you see that there's hardly any rise in the capital investment from the budget. So stepping up of the disinvestment will show that the capital expenditure is not going to increase in our budget. The next issue that comes up is that we are going in for mostly capital intensive investment. Big highways, freight corridor, big other projects, etc., that are highly capital intensive. So I remember as a child that whenever there was a road project, hundreds of people would be working there. Now on a big road project, you have hardly five people working with big bulldozers and big, tractors, etc. So, the employment generation in these capital intensive projects that government plans is not very much. So the net employment generation would be negative because we are cutting back on labor intensive areas like the rural employment guarantee scheme and other such areas, and we are going in for more capital intensive projects. So therefore, in the net, the amount of employment generated will be much less than what the is claimed. And today we need to give more employment, and that is a big issue that we need to worry about. The another issue that is to be worried about is that the immediate employment generation is needed because a lot of people have lost work, but these big projects will only generate extra employment over the medium and the long term, not in the short term. So in the immediate, what we'll see is a drop in employment generation rather than an increase in employment generation because of the investment projects that the government plans to fund. Now, again, we have seen that in government allotted projects, there's a lot of crony capitalism, and that's very likely in the case at present. We know that some business houses have been favored, for instance, in the case of ports, in the case of airports, in the case of telecom, and this kind of crony capitalism, if it continues, then it will lead to more inefficiency in the investment programs that are going to be carried forward. So there's a likelihood that this 1.75 lakh crore, also may not be achieved given the kind of political opposition that is likely to take place. We already see that, when the, the farm bills were brought in, the farmers are protesting. Similarly, when you do disinvestment, workers are going to protest in the public sector. Already, public sector workers in defense, in railways and other areas, they've been protesting. And this is likely to increase the protest. In which case, the program of disinvestment will get delayed. The insurance and the bank employees also will join hand. So you will find that farmers and workers together are going to be protesting, which will mean that all these programs will get slowed down, and the economy, instead of recovering, will actually face problem. So that's always the case with the supply side thing, that they take time, and in the meanwhile things do not work out. Now, instead of going in for big expenditures on big projects, what was required to spend on local infrastructure, on education and health, so that a lot of employment is generated in education and health and in the local infrastructure. Another scheme that the government is talking about is monetization of the public assets, whether it be the land that is with the government, railways land, and so on and so forth. But there, the problem, as far as I see, is that when you try to monetize a lot of assets and when you disinvest, then who's going to invest and buy these? Only those people who have surplus. Okay. And therefore, those people who have the surplus, they'll have to sell off some assets somewhere to buy these assets, cheap. So I expect that asset prices will drop if you have a large disinvestment program and large monetization of assets. A few lakh crores of property coming into the market, which would have to be bought. So people would be selling off their assets. And in that case, these assets will be bought cheap by the crony capitalists who would be able to get hold of these assets because of the support they have. And we've seen that this kind of thing has been happening in our system in the last few years. Now, taxation related issues are also very important, and Ms. Tyagarajan has already touched upon that we have been dependent on the indirect taxes rather than on direct taxes. Direct tax GDP ratios come down to about 5.7%. So the balance is the indirect taxes of about 11%. And because indirect taxes are regressive, they fall disproportionately on the poor. So we have a regressive component of the economy. And as it was already pointed out, we have raised the taxes on petro goods, diesel and petroleum and so on. And that's highly inflationary. And that's why the inflation has remained high in this period, where actually there was a demand shortage and prices should have crashed. So instead of prices going down, there's been a demand shortage. Also, because of supply bottlenecks, like for instance, automobile industry faces a shortfall in chips, and the textile industry faces a shortfall in terms of the yarn, etc., that was coming from outside. So because of that, you have a higher level of inflation than should have been there, given that the demand was short. So we need to worry about it. GST has proved to be very complicated. GST collections have risen of late in the last 4 months, but I think that is for special reasons. The government has introduced new, legislation, new provisions for the GST, and that's why it's risen. But otherwise, why would GST rise compared to the same period last year when such major components of the economy are shut, which contribute a lot to GST, whether it be hotels, restaurants, transportation, etc. They are big contributors to GST. So actually, GST collection should have fallen. So there are other reasons why GST collection has risen. I'm also told that the GST figures are gross. They're not the net figures because the government has not returned the GST that it should have returned to the various people to whom it owes the money. So, we have to look at the GST issues more closely. And because the growth is less, the revenue again next year is likely to be less. And that's why I was arguing that the deficit is likely to be higher. And if the deficit is higher, then there'll be cut back on capital expenditure and social sector. Now, there are other issues also, as has already been pointed out by Mr. Tyagarajan. On the one hand, we talk about self-reliance and the Atmanirbhar. On the other hand, we are giving concessions to foreign capital so that foreign investment can come in. We are saying that, record level of FDI has come in, which is true. And that is because technology companies all over the world are doing very well and they are flush with funds. And you can see why massive amount of investment came into the Reliance, because these big companies like Google and Facebook, etc., they want to take advantage of the Geo platform. And that's why a company like Reliance, which was the most indebted company in the country, has become completely debt-free within a short space of 4 or 5 months. So, you can see that there's a contradiction in what the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme is. The foreign exchange reserves have risen sharply, and that's because of fall in imports. And imports are still down, which is what suggests that the economy has not yet recovered back to where it was. So the rise in foreign exchange reserve is a sign of the slowing economy rather than that it's a positive sign. It's a positive sign if the economy was growing and we were importing and we were able to finance the imports based on the foreign exchange reserves that we had. But the fall in imports shows that the activity level is still low. The share market has risen dramatically, and that is leading to growing financial sector instability, because some sectors will do well, whether it be like, as I said, telecom, technology companies, FMCG, and related such companies. They will do well, and therefore their share prices will rise. But I think the problem is that the investors don't have alternate areas of investment. Fixed deposit rates have come down. Real estate is still facing a crisis. So where do people go? They are putting their money into the share market. But this is a speculative bubble. For instance, the Reliance share at 2,000 rupees gives a dividend of only 6.5 rupees. So your return is less than 0.3%. So the reason why people are investing in Reliance is that they expect the price to go up from 2,000 to 2,200. So you'll have a capital gain of 10%. But the moment that stops rising, then there could be a collapse because the return then falls very rapidly. And finally, the political aspects of the budget. The focus is on states going to polls. They're being given more funds, and that is not necessarily a rational economic decision. We need to have a rational economic decision of where the needs are, where the funds need to go. But then this is the usual thing that happens with all the budgets. Now, to conclude, one can say that the FM has not taken the correct macro into account and therefore missed an opportunity to bring the economy faster on its tracks. When the unlock begins, the economy does begin to recover. But the question is, we need to make the economy recover faster because the unorganized sector is hurting, the poor is hurting, unemployment has to be eradicated, more employment generation is needed. So the economy needed to recover faster, and for that, expenditures had to be boosted, even if the fiscal deficit had risen. So rather than the structural changes that the government is trying through the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme, what we needed to do was to boost demand. The Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme has all kinds of strange things that are not needed immediately. For instance, the setting of the hub for repair of aeroplanes, the changes in ISRO, the changes in the MSME definition and so on. These could have been done much later when the demand had been boosted and the economy had recovered. And even at that point, it's not very clear whether these changes are the changes that are required by the economy. Now, the higher deficit should have been resorted to both in the current year and in the next year, because that is what can boost demand and can boost production. And this year, all economies are going in for much higher fiscal deficit. For instance, in the US, you have a $900 billion package passed just by Mr. Trump, and before that, a $3 trillion package. And now, with Mr. Biden coming in, there's a $1.9 trillion package being talked of. So, already the US has boosted its fiscal deficit by about 20%, and it's running at about 25% or thereabout. Similarly, Japan and other countries have boosted their deficit. So this year, even if our fiscal deficit was 20-25%, it would not have been commented on, would not have been frowned upon by the credit rating agencies and the IMF, because that's what every government is doing. But next year, if the other economies have recovered and they've cut back on their deficit and we go for a higher deficit to boost the economy, then there could be problem. So to boost demand and production, we needed a higher fiscal deficit now rather than later. Other issue that needs to be highlighted, as I was saying, is we are headed towards a new normal. And we need to plan for this new normal, because this new normal will hit us very badly. There's more automation that's going on. There's more of shift from the unorganized sector to organized sector, like in the trading area. Demand has shifted towards the e-commerce, away from the brick and mortar stores, and that's why a lot of shops and other such small establishments are facing headwinds, and they may collapse. So basic problems of education, as I mentioned, they need to be addressed. Unorganized sector, there you have problem of unemployment. As I said, 20% of those who lost work in April, they have not yet recovered work. The demand for rural employment guarantee scheme remains high, and the data seems to suggest that people are only getting 45 days of work instead of 100 days of work. So a lot more needed to be given there for the rural employment guarantee scheme. And a scheme similar to that in the urban areas was needed. That needed to be funded. Education and health needed to be funded. And then finally, I would say, rather than go for high cost infrastructure, we needed to go for low cost infrastructure, because a poor country like ours requires local infrastructure in the rural areas, in the urban areas. And rather than go for capital intensive projects, we needed to go for the labor intensive ones, which would be in the local infrastructure area. One of the lessons that we have learned during the pandemic is that we are a collectivity, and the problems will be solved collectively, because even if one person has the disease, then it will continue to spread, and the virus is mutating, so the virus doesn't recognize borders, doesn't recognize class. So even the president of the US can get it, the prime minister of the UK can get it, the home minister of India can get it. So we have to solve the problem collectively. This is the new lesson. That's why I'm saying new normal. And I've discussed this extensively in my book, that the new normal is that we have to act collectively, and that's where the public sector comes in. And Mr. Thiagarajan has correctly pointed out that accountability is very essential. So public has to rise up and demand accountability from its leaders. The crony capitalism will end only when there's accountability. So police will behave itself only if the public demands accountability. The politicians, demand accountability from the police chief. But if the police chief is in the grip of the politicians, then of course there'll be no accountability left. This is what we are seeing, that our institutions, whether it be the police or it be the the judiciary, it be the media, accountability is going down. These are the institutions where there should be accountability, so that the right decisions are taken. And I think this is the opportunity. Mr. Thiagarajan correctly pointed out that when there's adversity, then it throws up opportunity. People suddenly become conscious, that something else is needed, and therefore we all must drive towards that. The political party that you represent, that you come from, that should drive that. Where the consciousness of the people changes, and that I think has to go across all the country. So that's why I keep arguing wherever I talk that we all need to move towards that. If the workers, if the farmers, if the intellectuals, the students, if they all demand greater accountability, our politics can get cleaned up, and then the crony capitalism that was being pointed out by Mr. Thiagarajan, that can come under control. But thanks a lot for organizing this talk, and I enjoyed the interaction with Mr. Thiagarajan. He has some nice insights into the economy. Thanks a lot for inviting me.